And I would also like to have a few housekeeping rules if we can. If you're not speaking, if you would please keep your microphone on mute, just so we can eliminate some of the background noise. And there will be different moments in the session where we will ask you to turn cameras on or off. If you would be willing to do so, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. We will have 3 sessions within this, this setup today. The first one will be looking to the Kuznets Prize winners. The second session will focus on a first presentation of papers coming out of issue 34.4. And then the second, or the third session rather, will also have a second set of papers from the same issue. You are welcome absolutely to make questions, give comments to the authors and to the sessions. I think for the sake of making it a bit organized, I would ask you either to use the digital raise hand function. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you have a little button that says reactions. When you pull up reactions, you should have something that's raise hand. Feel free to use that if you would like to give comment. Otherwise, if you prefer to give comments or raise questions in text, feel free to use the chat box, and I'll be monitoring and hopefully passing on the questions to our speakers. So I think without further ado, I can pass over to Klaus Zimmermann, who will be the first, let's say, moderator for the session on the Kuznets Prize. So thanks very much, colleagues. I look forward to this session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michaella, for this very well executed introduction. We try to get some experience with this. This is a new venture for us to be with the journal on the internet, to be closer to authors and readers. This is part of an effort to intensify the connections with our readers and followers, so to speak, and to create a larger identity with the journal. That's why we like to have this project we are exercising. Now, this has become relevant in particular during the pandemic. As you all know, these kind of exchanges become central and will not leave us, particularly because the pandemic will not leave us easily. That we realize now. If people who have not realized this yet, well, I think have to understand that. Now, the problem for journal editing in this case, at the beginning, there were 2 possibilities which could come. One is that people stop writing papers or refusing to be referees. That was one alternative. The other alternative was people suddenly find the right time for finishing manuscripts. But when we also were willing to write referee reports. And actually the second alternative came out, at least in the experience of this journal. So we have seen not masses of inflows of manuscripts on the COVID-19 issue, but also a large increase on inflow of manuscripts for other topics. And it's not true that most of our referees refuse to write reports. And I have to be very grateful for many of you also present, but all the others who have done it, in particular in a situation where we had to decide what to do with COVID-19 papers. Well, one policy could have been, well, if you're the AER, until you can publish something, the AER takes 5 years, yes, before you go through all the procedures. Then, but if you have something what is relevant now, well, it's not of interest for the journal really. So that is, on the other hand, though, so you want to have, of course, papers which are not just for now, but for the long term. So that's why certainly there was a market for and a need for articles which are, so to speak, for the daily discussion, fact-finding discussion. But there's also the problem that any reputable journal who wants to keep a standing needs to have articles which are of long-term interest. Yes. So in this situation, what we have done is to give for a while fast procedures for and fast publications also to COVID-19 papers. So it has taken sometimes only a few weeks before a paper came in, was standard refereed, and also then within a few weeks heavily revised. So the first papers and some of the authors are here, know that that it was not an easy way in, but it was a joint effort, which was really a strong collaboration, and I have to be very grateful for that. So that is all fine. And as the editor-in-chief, I can say now we have been not unsuccessful in attracting a number of good papers. So we have published up until now about, I think 22, if I count correctly, papers on COVID. This means we want to keep and want to keep a reputation for excellent COVID-19 papers. On the other hand, of course, the policy will change a bit. So we have to become slower with deciding, and also we also have to give possibilities for the other authors of other papers and other important topics which are there and will get out. Now, let me, after these first words, go over to the reason why one of the reasons why I'm meeting here, because I'm very happy to announce now formally the Kuznets Prize of 2022. Well, by 2022, I'm coming to that in a moment. Now, first, Simon Kuznets. We all should remember him well, a pioneer in population economics, and at that time professor at Harvard University, was the 1971 Nobel Prize laureate in economics. And actually this is 50 years ago, so it's a special moment here. I realize that also, yes. I mean, it's a special moment now, 50 years ago. He gave, so to speak, the prize name. Yes, actually, he was dead, unfortunately, of course, when we decided on that at that time, but his wife was agreeing at the time, many years ago, that we can use his name to give this prize. Now, the editors of the Journal of Population Economics award the Kuznets Prize annually to the best paper published in the year, in a certain year. So since we are fast with publishing, yes, we have seen, we already have published issue 1, 2022. We have had time enough to look into all the material again, 40 manuscripts, and yes, now we celebrate the Kuznets Prize 2022 because it's the year after, which is based on the material of the previous year. For the best paper, it's volume 34, 2021. And well, the paper which was winning was Working from Home and Income Inequality, Risks of a New Normal with COVID-19. And the authors are Luca Bonacini, Giovanni Gallo, and Sergio Scicchitano. They are all three here. Well, Luca and Giovanni both work at the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia. Sergio works at the National Institute for Public Policies and Analysis in Rome. And Giovanni actually works on both institutions. We all work on many institutions these days. Now, the paper pioneered the analysis of the consequences of the coronavirus and suggested the potential of the rise of a new form of inequality related to the new working from home. Yes, first it uses Italy. This was the second country which was hit heavily by COVID-19 after China, yes, so to speak. Well, the question was working from home, is this the new normal? Who will benefit from this if this happens? And the paper explores the potential consequences in the labor income distribution related to a long-lasting increase of working from home. Well, the finding is this would be associated with an increase in average labor income, good, but this potential benefit would not be equally distributed among employees, potentially bad. It would favor male, older, higher educated, and high paid employees, and would have larger regional differences following the possibilities between jobs where working from home is possible. Yes, but it's not everybody can easily work from home. We can, as scientists, more easily working from home, not fully, but some. Well, this also, as the paper argues, and the authors argue, this suggests the need for new inequality policies. Now, that is what the facts are, and maybe we can, so to speak, all use our reactions and not raise their hands, but maybe clap for the authors. If we cannot physically do it, at least this way. Congratulations to the authors and good for the paper. Now I have prepared, but I don't think we should waste that time. A nice certificate, which we typically have present physically normally, and it's prepared. And I swear, I sent it immediately after this session to the authors so that they can put it on in their office visibly. But I don't think it's worth to present it now online. I can, of course, I could bring it in if you insist. I do it. Okay, I swear. But I would prefer to let move over to after the congratulations to let the authors speak for a moment, and also let a prominent panel stick together with the authors, and let me already announce them. But that's one is Chen, the co-author of the Kuznets Prize winning article of the previous years from Yale University. It's Terra McKinnish, one of the editors of the journal, and Kompal Sinha, an associate editor from the journal. They're all here. Well, Kompal comes from the middle of the Australian night, but I see her fresh and smiling, and so the authors, are invited to react. Yes, who wants to speak? Sergio?
Maybe, yeah.
Yes.
We can start with the corresponding author again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It is a great honor for us to receive this award, and we are very, very happy for that. We would like to thank you, Klaus, as the editor-in-chief of the JOPE, and the editors of the JOPE for this prestigious award that you assign us. We would also like to thank you, Klaus, as the responsible editor for the paper, and the 4 referees for many useful comments that have significantly improved the paper. Without your inputs, we would not be here, that's for sure. The review process in the JOPE was really fast and efficient. We received a very detailed letter from the referees. The editor in charge and the 4 referees are the key of the success of our article. That is for sure. We are very honored to have published the paper in the JOPE. The JOPE, as you know, is a top journal. It is even increasing its impact factor and reputation, and it became a reference point for the COVID-19 topic, as Klaus just told us. The key point is that he has more or less the same rejection rate as the other, let's say, top journal, but he has a very shorter and efficient review process. This is one of the keys of the success of the journal, because the top journal had typically a very long process to publish a paper, 2, 3, 5 years. So again, thank you. As the last point, finally, please let me thank all the medical doctors, the nurses, all the health professionals, because I mean this paper here is about smart working. We were in smart working while writing this paper, but they were not. All of these workers were working in person. They cannot work remotely. They were dying while doing their work to allow us to live and to do our job. So again, Italy is one of the most affected countries by the COVID-19, as Klaus just noted. So my special thanks is for these people and in general for all the people who fight the COVID-19 every day. And I think that's enough. So if you want to add something, Giovanni or Luca?
Yes, also in my case, I would thank everyone for this important prize, especially, of course, the editors. We are, as Sergio said, very happy and proud to receive it because it represents for us an important acknowledgement and reward for our job and research and efforts. And I hope we will be able to honor this prize in our future researches and steps in the academia. So thank you very much.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Luca.
I would just say that a great honor for me and for us to receive this prestigious award, and sincerely, I still don't believe that's you. And I would like to thank my co-authors, which are not only co-authors but mainly friends. And I have learned and I'm learning a lot from Sergio and Giovanni. And thanks also to my professor of the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia and to the anonymous referees for their valuable contribution. And last but not least, thanks. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the editor-in-chief of the journal, Professor Klaus Zimmermann, for his great efforts and for the suggestions provided us in order to improve our paper. So thank you all very much for this important award.
Well, thank you. Now, let me start, so to speak, the panel discussion with the crucial question. The Economist recently has written an interesting article about a few pages about trends in research and economics, for finding out that while maybe 20 years or 30 years ago, most articles were written by one person, there's a rising trend of exploding numbers of co-authors and often combining co-authors around the globe. So last year's prize was also going to 3 people. You're also 3, but you're not unique in the sense that you are diverse. Last year it was the same kind of. It was 3 Chinese ethnic researchers, now 3 Italian researchers. So the winning team is not one person anymore, but more. How did you come together? Yes, I mean, okay. Besides being all Italian and so on, can you explain more how the research? How you started this research? Was the director of Sergio saying, "I need a paper on this," and then you were commissioned, or how is it working? Difficult question.
Yes, if I can start, let's say I'm actually a senior researcher at the INAP, which is the research of the National Institute for Public Policies Analysis, and in Italy. And let's say we are in charge with the topic of COVID-19 and labor market. Let's say from the point of view of both the academic research and the policy evaluation. So when we start writing the paper, the 2 of us, in particular me and Giovanni, were working at the INAP. In particular, Giovanni was postdoc at INAP, while Luca was finishing his PhD at the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia. And in particular, our work was made available to the Italian government for, let's say, tailoring the lockdown measures to build evidence-based policies. This was our main objective. For example, I was invited to a public hearing at the Italian Parliament on, let's say, the new inequalities generated by the COVID-19. Where I reported results on Italy from our GLO working papers and from the JOPE paper. So we are, let's say, quite happy about the impact of the paper on the academia and on the, let's say, on the civil society. That's from our point of view.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have among us Chen, the last year's winner and the leader of the ranking at the moment of the sites you can get out of the paper. Xi, what is your contribution here? What can you tell us?
Thank you so much for offering me such a great opportunity to express my congratulations to the authors. I'm here standing at a very special place on Yale campus, and many of us know that Professor Simon Kuznets proposed the establishment of this permanent research center for analyzing long-term growth of national economies. And many of us know the name of the institution, which is Yale Economic Growth Center. And that was founded like exactly 60 years ago, like on 1961. So it's a very special place. I was honored to receive the prize last year, and my warmest congratulations to the 3 economists who are winning this year's Kuznets Prize. And I'm very pleased to say Journal of Population Economics continue to be a leading outlet for economic research on COVID-19 by publishing very influential articles starting from the first days of the pandemic. And a very warm congratulations to all editors and the people who serve in the peer review process of those articles. I also benefited quite a lot from the peer review process of Journal of Economics of the Population Economics. And I think this year's recipient of the prize represent very important contributions. And in my research, I work on 2 topics related to labor economics. One is the labor market. The second is healthcare market. So I think there are 2 most important innovations after this pandemic. The first is the issue addressed by the 3 Kuznets Prize winners, which is the working from home, which is innovation. And the second is in the healthcare market. It's about telemedicine. So the patients no longer need to see the doctors in person due to the concern of infectious disease. I think those are the 2 most important innovations. So if we say this pandemic in a positive way, so it promotes more innovations like this. So I very much believe this contribution will be having a long-lasting effect. So I congratulations to the authors for this very influential and very important contributions to the field. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have on the panel list still Terra and Kompal. I'm not sure who wants to start first. Terra?
Yes, I'll just first offer my congratulations to the 3 authors and thank them for using this journal as an outlet for such a nice paper. Klaus has really, made such amazing efforts to make this journal an important outlet for quality COVID research. And in that research, I think that addresses the distributional consequences of the current environment, and the policies are particularly important. So I particularly like the fact that this prize is highlighting not just COVID research, but particularly research related to distributional consequences, which I think are particularly important. And thank you to the authors for the work and for using us to distribute your research.
Thank you, Terra. Last but not least, Kompal.
Thank you so much, Klaus, for the opportunity. And thank you so much for all the authors for this year and the last year's papers. I've read both papers very carefully, and I was surprised and amazed by the extensive data analyses, the quality of writing, and the timing of doing the analyses. and something unforeseen in economics. I must say we kind of like to write paper in the long lens. So congratulations to the wonderful paper. And what we have done for this paper starting this year is to do a tweet about the paper on behalf of the journal, and that is with the objective of reaching people and researchers in the low and middle income countries who might not have the correct access to this high quality papers. So many thanks for this contribution. Really amazing work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. We just misused our time budget for 2 minutes or so. Thank you all, and congratulations again. We go on now, and Michaella has again the command for let things go on. Michaella.
Very much. I think I can actually turn immediately over to Kompal, who will be our chair for the next session. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michaella. So for the first session of this evening is again a COVID-based analysis using 3 wonderful papers. We have Martin, Daniel, and Augusto talking about their papers, and the session is going to be for 45 minutes, I believe, a few minutes short now. So how about we try to do a 10 minutes for a kind of overview by the authors, and then a 5 minute of a discussion. Best would be to pop your questions in the chat if it is during the presentation, otherwise 5 minutes after the presentation. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Kompal, and sincere congratulations to Sergio, Giovanni, and Luca. Fantastic achievement. Would you please make me a co-host or enable me to share my screen so that I can share the presentation, please? In the meantime, also congratulations to Klaus. Fantastic job. It's a very, very nice special issue putting together. Yes, very good, important research. And I hope I'm now sharing the right paper. Let me turn it into presentation. Can you please confirm that you can see the first slide? Very good. So thanks very much for the opportunity to present this paper. It's joint work with Luca from the University in Banska Bystrica and Bernd Schmidtwerter from Linz. This is a paper about the impact of repeated mass antigen testing for COVID-19 on the prevalence of the disease. Well, to motivate this paper is of course, the general motivation is very clear. The COVID-19 pandemic is ravaging the world. 266 million just tested positively around the globe. More than 5 million have died, which is just the measured numbers. The true numbers are much higher. And more specifically, the motivation for this paper is that many governments try to slow down the pandemic by imposing mobility restrictions like lockdown and similar, which did help to some extent, but there was a heavy toll on the economies. Then in some countries, there was what was considered and also implemented is that it was the idea that mass testing could actually identify the positive cases, remove them from circulation, and that would help to mitigate the pandemic. Now, this is a potentially efficient and even cost-effective instrument to slow down the pandemic. However, there are other aspects which are not working, which are potentially actually working in the wrong direction, and this is that those tests, when you distribute the negative test certificates, they could create a sense of false security, and they have behavioral consequences. And so people change behavior, don't isolate themselves, and this may potentially even work towards more faster spreading of the pandemic. Now, the empirical question that we try to address in this paper, which of these two effects or the several effects that may be triggered by the testing prevails. So what we do is that we identify the impact of repeated mass testing on the incidence, or more precisely test positivity, and the spread of the pandemic using exploring a quasi-experiment in Slovakia. What happened in Slovakia was the following thing. There was a nationwide mass rapid antigen testing last year. the whole population 10 to 65 years of age was targeted by this testing. Over 65 also, if those people were still working, and this was about 80% of the total population. It was technically voluntary, but not participating was very costly. Why? Well, positive cases, their households and their self-trace recent contacts were quarantined for 10 days. And if you violated that restriction, there was a fine of about 1.5 average gross monthly wage. So if you didn't have a negative test certificate, this was applied to you as well. And so not getting tested, you automatically were quarantined, which was not very seen very favorably. Eventually, about 85% of the eligible population was tested in the different rounds in 79 districts of Slovakia. Slovakia is a country of about 5.5 million residents. The test was piloted in 4 districts, and there was no PCR post-verification. All what was done was the rapid antigen test. What happened exactly? The first wave took place on October 31st and November 1st, 2020. And then here comes the quasi-experiment. There was a second wave. However, the second wave was not nationwide. It actually was only conducted in those districts which tested, where test positivity was 0.7% or higher. These were 45 districts. This threshold was not known until just a few days before the retesting, and there was much uncertainty about whether it would take place. It was politically very heated topic, so districts actually learned about whether they would be retested just about 5 days before the actual retesting took place. Literature review, very briefly. There have been several papers which suggest that yes, rapid antigen testing may work. There have been arguments that the effectiveness of such testing depends on public compliance and quarantine. Yes, that makes sense. Testing may work, but increases the range of social networks as people feel more secure. Yes, that's what I already said. And it can be effective, but has to be conducted in short time intervals. And this is an important point which I will explore a little further and provide evidence for that. Pavelka and colleagues, they actually studied the testing in Slovakia, but this study was actually heavily criticized for a point, which is for that they actually compared their identification strategy was to compare the first and second round, but the samples changed between the 2 rounds, and that's why there was quite some critique of that paper. Now, our approach was that we explored the set quasi-experiment, and there were 3 types of districts, or districts were treated in 3 different ways during the testing campaign. You can see the maps at the bottom of the slide. You see the first round was conducted nationwide, and in the right panel you see test positivity in that first round. The red districts are those where test positivity was higher, and the yellow one where it was lower. In the left panel, then you see the distribution of districts. The gray ones up in the north, those were the piloted districts, and we don't consider them in the analysis. And then you have the red ones and the bluish ones. The blue ones are those where there was only round 1, and the red ones are those which were tested first and then retested. And that is our treatment. So the data that we use we use the passive PCR testing surveillance data. There were many testing centers around the country, and all those people who either had health difficulties or they had other reasons to get tested, they could go there freely, show up and get tested. We don't use the data from the mass testing waves as such. So what we identify here is the effect of retesting and quarantining positives, their households and close contacts, and those non-tested from nationwide measures, lockdown, school closure, ban on gathering, etc., and any other overall trends affecting the whole country. Data methodology. We have daily numbers of infections by district as measured by the PCR test. Actually, we also include rapid antigen tests in the analysis. We consider this doesn't make much difference. We have two measures of the spread of the pandemic. We have a 7 days rolling average of infections on the district level, and we have a simple version of the reproduction number that we calculate for each district. As I mentioned, mass testing is not included. A simple difference in difference model where the pre-period is the actual day of testing, and then the post-period is 14 days after round 2. This is an assumption, whether it should be 14, 10 days or 20 days. This is an assumption that we make, but then we actually test what happens if we have different number of days after the testing when we look at the data and the effects. This looks a bit scary, but it's actually rather straightforward. What you see here is the 7-day average of on the left panel, 7-day average in districts, the lines that represent districts, and for each district you see 7-day average of cases. And the thicker lines, these are the averages for the districts which were the bluish is those which were tested only once, and the incidence was relatively low in the first round. And the red thick line is the districts which is the average of the districts which were actually retested and where the test positivity in the first round was higher, about 0.7%. What you see is the day of a testing. It's if you can see my arrow, it's where the arrow points. This is November 7-8, and you see the difference, which 14 days later was smaller between the two districts. So this would descriptively indicate that there might have been some effect of a testing on mitigation of the pandemic. Similarly, for the reproduction number, at the date of testing, you see a difference here, where of course the districts which had higher positivity had higher reproduction number, and 14 days after the testing, it was actually reverse, small but reverse difference. So of course this is just descriptive picture of what was going on. But if you look at the simple model that we ran on the data, you see that the difference is actually significant. This is log cases, and you see that the 14 days after the second round, the difference declined by about 35%, and the reproduction number declined by about 0.28 compared to those districts which were not retested. Here we took into consideration all the districts minus those which were the 4 which were piloted. So there's 75 districts taken into this analysis. We thought, okay, let's be a bit more restrictive and let's look at a narrower band around the 0.7 threshold to be close to the idea of quasi-experiment, that we look at in some narrower neighborhood of the treatment. And there the figures are very similar, but estimated with lower precision, so we lose statistical significance. To understand this a little better, what we show here is that these diagrams show that if we increase here on the horizontal axis, as we increase the size of the number of districts that we take into consideration, the figures represent the size of population in the above and below districts. Initially, you get a lot of variation, so imprecision is very high. Of course, there is only a few districts here, but as you take into the analysis more districts, you get more precision, and you get a significant impact for the effect on cases, and similarly for the reproduction number. So you need to take into analysis about 1.3 million people for cases, or about 0.8 million people for reproduction number to find the effect to be significant, although consistently the point estimate is signaling that mitigation. The second round actually mitigated the pandemic to some extent.
Martin, you have another minute or so.
Thank you. Perfect. We looked at this is an important point that the paper contributes, is that we look at the duration. Let's just look at this panel down here, lower left corner. We tested here the idea what is we reran the analysis for different assumption about when is time 2, yes, when the effect took place, 14 days, 10 days, 15 days, and we actually found that it was about 2 weeks after the testing where the effect was at its maximum, and after that the effect withered away. So it was a temporary effect which was in line with the previous arguments, previous thoughts on the impact of such policy instrument. This is one but last slide. We tested, we ran a few placebo tests with different thresholds, fake thresholds, 0.2%, 0.5% of the treatment, or different treatment date as if it took place on November 1st. No effect found, and rightly so. Robustness checks, PCR plus AG test, only PCR test, control for mobility, control for population density, alternative calculations of RT, all key results stay same. Bottom line, 14 days after the second round of testing, new infections decreased by about 30%, and the reproduction number decreased by about 0.3, all measured as test positivity in passive surveillance testing. And importantly, the impact peaked about 2 weeks after the second round, then faded out slowly. Robustness check works. And I stop here. Thank you very, very much for your attention.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. Questions, please. No questions. So it's a very interesting paper. Thank you so much, Martin. And I notice we're running out of time, so might move to the next paper now. And if there are any further thoughts about this paper, please pop it into the chat box. Can we have Daniel present his talk, please? Thank you so much.
Hello. So yeah, okay. Hello, my name is, thank you for inviting me and having me for this wonderful event. So my name is Daniel Greber. I'm a minted postdoc at the German Institute for Economic Research, and I'm going to present to you our paper, our contribution, which has the name COVID-19, a crisis of the female self-employed. Joint work together with Alexander Kritikos, who is a professor at the University of Potsdam and scientific member of the board of the German Institute for Economic Research, and Johannes Seebauer, who is a very talented PhD student at the German Institute for Economic Research. So to give you a brief motivation, I think I don't tell you news if I tell you that since 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic basically affects every domain of life, and it's here to stay until 25 at least, I believe. And especially at the beginning, in the absence of any vaccinations, the spread of the governments could contain the spread of the communicable disease, COVID-19, only due to the limitation of context, so non-pharmaceutical measures. And in an early study, Adams, Purcell et al. Showed that compared to the US and UK, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the labor market were rather muted in Germany compared to the other two countries, which they argue is due to the fact that that the German labor market is very, very, very restrictive, and at least in the short run, there are very limited possibilities to fire people or to finish to end the contracts. And especially in Germany, we had the short-time working scheme, which is called Kurzarbeit. But all those considerations do not apply to self-employed individuals. And especially among self-employed individuals, it is that especially women work in occupations which rely predominantly on interpersonal contacts compared to men. So starting from that observations, we address, in this contribution, we address three important questions. So the first one is do there actually exist any gender difference in the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic among the self-employed? And if there does, if any different gender difference emerge, what can actually explain those differences between self-employed men and women? And the third question is, and which I consider our largest contribution here, is how much do various economic problems, which are very special to the COVID-19 pandemic, contribute to the phenomenon at hand? And for this ambitious endeavor, we used a very special data set, the so-called SEPCOF data set, which surveyed roughly 6,700 respondents at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, so in the second quarter of 2020. And what makes this data so special is that the fact that it's a subsample of the general population of the socioeconomic panel, which is a representative household survey or panel in Germany, which runs since 1984 and which surveys its individuals about their household situation, their individual experiences on the labor market, attitudes, education, among others. And this enables us to link a rich set of pre-pandemic, predetermined information on those individuals. In this special survey, we have a module especially designed for self-employed individuals, and there we focus on 3 outcomes. So we focus on the probability of reporting an income decline from self-employment due to the COVID-19 pandemic, whether self-employed individuals report about a reduction in weekly working hours, or whether they report that they work at least partially from home due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For the sake of the event and due to the short time window, I will focus on the event of an income decline, for which we find some most pronounced results. And in the survey, respondents, or at least self-employment respondents, also report whether they were restricted in their business activities due to supply shortages, demand shortages, or due to regulations and restrictions, which were highly debated dimensions of economic disruptions at the onset of COVID-19 pandemic. So the question arises, how can we explain the gender gap in those outcomes? And for that, we focus on the Gearbach decomposition, in which we decompose the gender gap into various contributions of covariates. And for those, we consider various demographic characteristics, the household context, so proxies for the socioeconomic status, personality traits, and the industry affiliation of those individuals. Diving in our results, we see a marked difference in the likelihood of reporting income losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic among the self-employed. Self-employed women were about 17 percentage points more likely to report income losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic compared to self-employed men. And we don't see such a marked difference among employees. Moreover, the numbers for employees coincide largely with the figures for the short-time working scheme in Germany at that point in time, which is the second quarter of 2020 in Germany. To put more precise numbers on those figures, when we focus on our restricted model, in which we do not include any covariates except state and week fixed effects, we find that self-employed women were 17 percentage points more likely to report income reductions due to COVID-19 compared to men. If we include our full set of covariates, this gender gap decreases by about 9 percentage points and becomes insignificant. And then, diving into our Gearbach decomposition, we find that about 9 percentage points of the total change of 9.2 percentage points in the gender gap can be explained by the industry affiliation of self-employed individuals, and which means that self-employed women predominantly work in occupations or industries which are associated with income reductions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we we wanted to dive more into this phenomenon and try to understand why this phenomenon emerged in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And for that, we focus on our three mechanisms at hand, which are the being restricted in business activities due to the governmental measures, supply shortages or demand shortage. And we find a marked or a pronounced difference, gender difference in being restricted or regulated in the business activities among self-employed persons. And this number is about 20%. And if you include our full set of covariates, this number decreases by about 15 percentage points. And once again, we find that the industry affiliation is a chief contributor to this change in the likelihood of being restricted or regulated in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And for the other outcomes, we don't find such a pattern. And then we went back to our main specification and included the indicator for being restricted in the business activities by governmental measures in the G-Bach composition for experiencing income losses in the wake of for the gender gap in experiencing income losses in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, and find that it partially explains the change in the gender gap from the moving from the restricted to the unrestricted model. And this also attenuates the contribution of the industry affiliation in our G-Bach composition. So that's a short overview of our paper, which we believe is an important contribution in explaining the experience or in explaining and characterizing the gender gap in income losses among the self-employed. And if you have any further questions, I'm very welcome, or I'm looking forward to answer those questions. And thank you for all those individuals or persons who contributed to this paper, especially three referees who hugely improved the paper in the process.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was very well timed. Questions, please. If you stop sharing a screen, I can see if there's a raised hand or somewhere or not.
Okay. Should I stop sharing?
Any questions? Yes, thank you.
Can I run a question? I'm Sergio.
Sure, Sergio.
Thank you so much. Very nice paper. I'm curious about the big five effect. Do you remember which is the most relevant personality trait in terms of the loss? Which is the most relevant trait of the big five, if you remember? Because it is quite relevant information from the behavioral economics point of view. It is a really nice information.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for the question. So so we have a lot of potential explanatory factors. So it's but as far as I can remember from the tip of my head, it's I think openness to experience. So it actually really makes sense. So people were more likely to adapt probably to the new working situation or to the environment or to new technologies, are more likely to be better off in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that as far as I can recall, that completely makes sense. Which is actually what is a nice feature. We measure personality traits right before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2019. So it's a really nice feature of the data.
Any more questions? So while people are thinking about their questions, I just have a quick question about what were your observations about families which are, just females and a couple, single mothers and that kind of thing? Was there anything that you noticed that you'd like to share here, please? So,
so we focus a little bit on the household dimension, which was a very nice addition by a referee. We considered the relative income within the household in order to figure out whether it's maybe households exploiting comparative advantages in household production at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So while the relative income position within the household plays a crucial role in explaining income losses, so people with higher relative income are less likely to report income losses, so meaning that they are more likely to continue working in the labor market, whereas those others withdraw their labor market participation. It doesn't contribute meaningfully to the change in the gender gap in our geographic composition.
Great, thank you so much, Daniel. If there are no more questions for this paper, and if you're still thinking about the questions, please pop them in the chat box and we can have a discussion after the third presentation, which is by Augusto. So Augusto, do you want to take over the floor, please? Thank you.
Hello, hi. Can you see my screen?
Yes, that's a very beautiful background, but we can't see your slides.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. 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 So, hi everybody. I'm Augusto Cecco from Sapienza University. This is joint work with the other three young co-authors from Sapienza University as well. So this is a different paper from the one you've just seen so far, because it starts from a quite different research question. So we asked ourselves, personally, I'm used to do policy evaluations or evaluation of shocks using a quasi-experimental framework. So this time when COVID happened, unfortunately, I asked myself, what can we do to estimate something, this case, the impact of COVID on mortality, but also on economic outputs and so on, in a scenario in which all units are treated at the same time. Because we know when a phenomenon like a pandemic like COVID, in Italy, it mostly in the north, especially in the first wave. But all the other regions were somewhat affected by COVID because of the lockdown. So some causes of deaths were influenced by COVID as well, even if there was no COVID in the south of Italy or in most of the south of Italy. This is the research question we asked. And also we knew at the time, and still is unfortunately still the case, that there is a severe, especially at the beginning, there was a severe underreporting, even in developed countries. Now this severe underreporting is not, we all agree, most of us agree that, there is no such, the measurement error is not as big as it used to be last year, but there is still some underreporting possibly. And also the data are very rarely available at a very granular level, So we tried, but the time is that the Italian National Institute of Statistics made available data on all cause deaths, the daily data. And they are still available, and now are even available from 2011 to 2021. And when Istat started releasing this data, we thought that we could do something with those data to use them to estimate in a better way mortality outcomes. So at the moment, I talk about last year, but it's still the case. Most studies from institutions or from scholars use basic what we call the intuitive approach. So they see how many people used to die in a municipality or in a province or a region last year or 5 years ago, or the average of the last few years, and use that as the counterfactor. So how many people would have died if COVID was not here? We say, okay, this is a good approach, but maybe we are in 2021. We were in 2020 when we thought about it. We can exploit new methodologies, especially the machine learning approach, to do something better, to provide estimates at the granular level that we can trust more than those based on the intuitive approach. So what we did in this paper, we use what we call the machine learning control method. So we use basically machine learning methods In this case, we use lasso, random forest, and stochastic gradient boosting to predict. So it's like that you stop in early 2020, you say, okay, I have all this information. Let me do the best possible prediction of how many people would have died in the following months or year. And then we compare this prediction with what actually happened. So the prediction are our counterfactor. And these are individual estimates. So we have an estimate for each municipality and for each period we analyze. So we use 16 selected covariates and relating to deaths, demographic, health system, economic, contamination, air pollution, and so on. This is just a brief description of the data. And then we tested this data. So we pretended that we used data up to 2018 to predict the excess mortality outcomes in 2019, which was a no pandemic year, and to see how well our prediction works. So we used the mean square error, which is the most used estimate criterion, and also this is the mean absolute error, and we show that basically our all machine learning approaches, even OLS here is used as a machine learning approach because we are still using the training and testing approach. They outperform the intuitive approach. In most cases, this is a big, so the outperformance is on average of 18 percentage points. In here, I'm just showing the outcome for March, June. We have also September 2020, and then we split all the estimates according to population size. What strikes is that for very small municipalities, machine learning methods perform much better than the intuitive approaches. Then for medium-sized municipalities, they perform better, but not much better. And then for large municipalities, they perform as well as intuitive approach. So basically, the intuitive approach works well for large municipalities. This means that works well for regions, for provinces, but it doesn't work well for municipalities which are below, let's say, below 10 to 20,000 inhabitants. This is a map of the results. So you can see that most of the deaths occurred in the north-west of Italy. This was very severe because we are talking about plus 300% excess deaths, up to 300% deaths in the north, in the region around, in the Lombardy region, basically, and also in a bit in the Emilia-Romagna region. Then the effects started to attenuate. So we see that we still have lots of deaths in up to September, but the impact attenuated because also during the summer there were basically almost no deaths due to COVID-19. I'm talking about 2020 here. In this graph, we just show that when we predict, our algorithm doesn't work well when we predict in a year with which was not hit by COVID as 2019. So there is no spatial clustering, but we have a lot of spatial clustering here when we predicted in 2020 because of COVID-19 a specific part of Italy. So the fact that we see this map is not it's completely due to COVID. So and this is testimonied by Moransai test. So what are the key takeaways for this paper? So we exploit granular and frequent data. We show that this way we could carry out an accurate counterfactual estimation, even in a situation in which all units are treated. This is something almost new. Let's say there were very few papers doing something similar, not the same as we did. And this is an ongoing process for us. So we are still working on this approach and on other applications. Also, as I said, intuitive approaches work well in large areas, but not that well in small areas. And also we provide open access data to the research community. And we know of several papers that are using our data to continue working on COVID-19. Just to conclude, I'll show you, this is the updated map. So we are still updating the estimates. So this map refers to 30 September of 2021 instead of 2020. So we see that with the second and third wave in Italy, also the center and the south of Italy were affected by COVID, unfortunately. So the map doesn't look anymore as it did in the paper, in the published one. And just to show you, we have a website which is in Italian, where you can download the estimates. Yes, our estimates. But you can also interact with the map. You can see, you can look for a municipality, and clicking on municipality, you see the name, see number of deaths in the period from 21st of February 2020 and 30th of September 2021, the estimated number of deaths, and so the excess deaths according to our estimates. And you can also see like a time lapse of the COVID-19 with daily estimates that clearly show you that in March this clustering happened. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much, Augusto. They're very interesting indeed. Any questions, please?
Yes, sorry, I have a short question for Augusto. Congratulations for the paper. Looks very interesting, actually, the way in which you try to capture and measure the excess mortality was a huge question. I was a bit surprised, and actually I'd like to see whether you have an intuition for these results, why the machine learning approach works better in smaller municipalities rather than in macro area, because, you know, gut feeling, being not an expert of the field, is it should have been the reverse. No, the more data I feed it, the algorithm, the better and more precise my estimates. So I just wonder whether it's some intuition.
Yeah. So we thought about it. At the beginning, we were not sure about it. So the main reason is that it's the opposite. So it's that the intuitive approach works well in large areas. So what happens that in large areas, mortality is quite stable. It's very stable over the years. So when you use the estimate of the average of 5 years ago, 3 years ago, it predicts well what would have happened in the following year. On the other side, when you predict for small municipalities, when there are maybe 5 deaths per year, 6 deaths per year, with the intuitive approach, there might be last year 0 deaths because of chance. And so in that case, it doesn't work that well. So it's the opposite. It's not the, but we're working. So we in this paper, we used a selected 16 covariates. Now we're going to use like 200, 300 covariates. So we're going to do something different to see if the prediction power increases. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I think this is very important direction forward, and yeah, there's a secondary disaster of health crisis, but there are even more, like the screening of cancer. If they are canceled, it will have an even longer effect, and also even longer effect is about the mental illness, the PTSD. Those are will be like being seen the data in the far from now. So I would say this is very important to keep monitoring this secondary and the third and the fourth waves of excess deaths. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are spot on time with the session. And can I please get everybody to applaud these 3 presenters? Wonderful papers, wonderful presentations, and very well timed indeed. Thank you very much. And I'll hand it back to Michaella.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Really fascinating work. And thank you for being so on point and finding a nice way to still make it interactive in a digital session. Much appreciated. We'll now turn to the second, let's say, paper session, which will feature again 3 articles that were promoted in issue 34.4. Terra is one of the editors of the journal and will be one of chairs, or will be the chair for the session. So Terra, please, let me turn to you.
Yes, so as before, for our 3 papers this session, we will have 10-minute presentations. I will interrupt with a brief warning with 1 minute left, and then we'll have a brief discussion afterwards. Our first presenter is Lamis Katan. And so Lamis, if you want to share your screen and begin, thank you.
Sure, thank you, Terra, and thank you for having me today. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting today a paper on stay-at-home orders, social distancing, and trust in the United States. It's a paper co-authored with Abel Broder and Ida Grigorieva. So, yeah, the COVID-19 virus continues to spread with many remaining uncertainties about it. And it has been about 2 years that governments are implementing several policies to control the spread of the virus, and among which is by now the famous stay-at-home order. So studies so far have shown that governmental actions, along with public cooperation, can indeed slow down the spread of the disease. But the effectiveness of these orders highly depends on public compliance and whether citizens conform to these orders. So understanding whether and how communities respond to government decisions is crucial for policymakers and health officials in choosing the appropriate response to the pandemic. What we do in this paper is that we study the determinants of implementation and compliance with stay-at-home orders in the US by focusing on trust and social capital. So basically, we test whether counties with higher trust level and social capital were more likely to implement stay-at-home orders, that's first, and whether their citizens reduce their mobility more than counties with lower level of trust following the implementation of these policies. So how do we measure trust and social capital? First, we rely on data on repeated questions from the General Social Survey in the United States, so the GSS, between 2000 and 2014. So we rely on pre-pandemic data. And we focus on questions related to politics and religion, and we measure trust in institutions and trust in others. Our main trust measure is trust in other people. And the underlying assumption behind it is the belief that trust in others will affect compliance by a growing number of studies showing a positive relationship between social capital and cooperation that is necessary for the efficient provision of public goods. And we also rely on alternative trust measures that are basically trust in institutions, including governmental institutions like the Fed and the Congress, trust in press, trust in medicine, and trust in science. Then we build our data set. So for each county, we build our trust measures by computing a weighted average share from respondents' answers. And then we measure out our outcome variable, that is mobility. So to measure mobility, we rely on cell phone data from Unicast's COVID-19 toolkit. And what this data set does is that it measures changes in average distance traveled and the non-essential visitation. And of course, the level of mobility is compared to the pre-pandemic period. And we also rely on Google Community mobile reports as an additional measure of mobility. And what this data set provides is changes in visit to many categories of places, including groceries, pharmacies, and parks. So basically, it's divided into essential visitations and non-essential visitations. And we rely on this data set as a robustness check to the first one. Our first question in this paper is whether trust affects the implementation of stay-at-home orders. So we find, in fact, that these orders or stay-at-home orders are more likely to be implemented in counties and states with a democratic governor. So basically that politics plays a role in implementing stay-at-home orders, which is in line with previous findings, and also what we witnessed with the reaction of Biden's government versus Trump government towards the pandemic. But we find no evidence that trust in others or any alternative trust measure are related to whether or not stay-at-home orders are implemented. And they also do not affect the timing of stay-at-home orders. Our second question in this paper is whether trusts affect compliance to governmental orders. So what we do is that we employ a double difference framework, and we examine whether counties with high level of trust are more likely to decrease their mobility once a stay-at-home order is implemented. And of course, we control for all other implemented policies that might affect the level of mobility, like for instance, school and business closures. And our findings suggest that individuals living in counties with relatively more trust than others decrease their mobility significantly more than counties with lower trust, of course, once a stay-at-home policy is implemented. As for alternative trust measures, we find order compliance is especially large for those who have higher trust in press, higher trust in Congress and in the federal government. So it really seems like trust in governmental institutions and press is crucial for these policies to be more effective. Now, one would argue that this larger decrease in mobility could be driven by a voluntary decrease in counties with higher trust rather than just compliance with governmental orders. So what we do is that in an alternative specification, we also account for change in mobility due to a voluntary preventative behavior. And we find that people who live in counties with higher share of trust and others demonstrate indeed stronger adherence to stay-at-home orders, but this is also in addition to their larger voluntary decrease in mobility. So trust would lead to a significantly larger decrease in mobility through two different channels, which highlights even more the importance of trust. We also look at the intensity of strictness of the implemented policies by relying on the Oxford COVID-19 governmental response tracker data. And we build a scale from 0 to 2, measuring the intensity, where 0 means no measures were taken. 1 means that authorities recommended to the public not to leave their houses. So it's basically just a recommendation. And 2, if staying at home was required. So we define this as a high intensity order. And what we found that the effect of trust is slightly larger high than for low mobility density orders. So if citizens have higher trust, governments wouldn't really need to implement strict policies to stem the spread of the virus. A simple recommendation to just stay at home would be enough. And these results do have, in fact, an important policy implication, especially that the strictness of lockdown has been shown to be related to huge economic losses and the happiness of citizens, basically. And finally, we conduct simple counterfactual exercises just to determine how higher trust in governmental institutions would have affected the magnitude of compliance with orders in the United States. Now, in our sample, the average trust in governmental institutions was about 30%, which is low. And our results suggest that a level of confidence in Congress and federal government of around 60%, so double of the initial or the real trust level, would be associated with 3 percentage point further decrease in non-essential visits and a further 2.2 percentage point decrease in distance traveled for counties once stay-at-home orders are implemented. So, in the United States, specifically, the Biden administration seemed to be aware of the importance of trust, as it called, as soon as Biden or the government of Biden gained power, they start calling for restoring trust, credibility, and accountability of the federal government. That's going to be it, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lemus, for a very clear and efficient presentation. I'm now open for questions or comments. I'll go ahead and start and ask if you could give us a little bit of information, perhaps, about the correlates with trust. So did you see any evidence that areas with higher levels of trust were different in population density or age distribution, for example?
Yeah, we did check the determinants of trust, and we've seen no, at least when it comes to the population or the location, geographic location of the counties or the states, we found no correlation between these variables and trust level. So it seems like at least the pre-pandemic levels of trust were to a certain extent exogenous to these variables.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Pepe?
Yeah, just a quick curiosity, but then we'll follow up my presentation. Just wanted to know whether the counties where you have higher level of trust are somehow correlated with the vote for the Democratic Party.
We didn't check for this, no, but we did check whether Democrats are more likely to implement stay-at-home orders, and we do indeed find that Democrats are more likely to implement it, but it doesn't seem like the political affiliation is related to the level of trust. Yeah, thank you.
All right, anything else? Wonderful. Well, thank you. So we'll move on to our next presentation by Pepe Fortunato. You can share your screen and begin. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Terra, for leaving me the floor. I don't see my presentation here. Just a second. Should be able to. I cannot see I don't know why, just a second, let me try once again. Meanwhile, just let me thank the organizer of the event, because it's really a pleasure to present here, and congratulate the winners of the prize, of the Kuznets prize. And now let me start again. Okay, it looks better. Can you see my screen?
You've started screen sharing. Your presentation hasn't appeared.
Yes.
Now there we go.
You can see that, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. Excellent. So as I was saying, it's a pleasure also to present right after Kathleen, because it made my life much easier in terms of presenting a series of concepts that are in our presentation as in my presentation. And somehow I think our results, this is a paper which I co-authored with my friend and co-author Nia JOPE, which is now in Marseille, are somehow complementary to what Kathleen was telling you. So basically, what was the question that we try to address is whether or not culture matters for compliance for what has to do with the social distancing measures that were implemented during the COVID-19 crisis. The point was somehow striking, as what struck us in a sense, as homogeneous have been the reaction of many states, Western states, but not only Western states, in terms of policy measures implemented to react to the common shock, which was kind of unprecedented. But as homogeneous has been the policy reaction, as heterogeneous has been the kind of reaction of the population to this policy and the effects of the policy in terms of compliance, which varied widely across countries and within countries. And one photo struck me a lot. That was May of last year, May 2020. At that point in Italy and Germany, the kind of measures that were implemented, that were applied in terms of social distancing were more or less the same. At a certain point, a photo circulated in the Italian press, and was a photo from the shore sides of the Isar River in Munich, in Bavaria, and was showing a lot of German people taking the sun in small nuclear familiar groups. And that was a huge scandal in Italy, because at that point in Italy, we were all scared like hell, and everybody was closed at home and was complying a lot with the request not to move, even when this request was no more compulsory. And this was somehow explaining the difference in attitude to rules, which were pretty similar. Of course, part of the story there is explained by the fact that the first wave, as we've seen with the presentation of Augusto, was affecting much more Italy than other countries, in particular in certain areas in the northern east of Italy, but also has to do, in our opinion, with the fact that individual mobility decision always entail a delicate trade-off between the chance, in this case, of contracting or diffusing the virus and the costs which are associated, economic and personal costs, to give up certain activity. And culture, what culture does is precisely affecting this trade-off. So that's why culture may explain the different level of compliance. So what we do in a nutshell, in more concrete and technical terms, is that we try to bring to the data the hypothesis that culture matters and has an impact on the level of compliance. And in particular, we use set of data that Kahanec was presenting you. They use these data for their robustness check, which is the Google COVID-19 community mobility reports, which is pretty interesting. And actually was the suggestion of a referee, because we started with some telephone tracking in Switzerland, and then we move to the Google data, because these data set offer us data on retailer recreation, which is the non-essential kind of mobility, which I think is really the measure that we want to check and we want to control to study voluntary compliance to indication by part of the governments. And we look at Switzerland, which somehow provides a unique case study, because the same set of public health measure, at least for a certain period during the pandemic, as we will see in a moment, and been enacted in geographical areas which have very different historical roots. Now, how do we what is our measure of culture in our paper? Well, we somehow build on the cultural relativism hypothesis and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and on all the economic literature we follow and built on that, like the famous Bizine and Verdier paper of 2011, and take on board the idea that the language the language spoken in one region, in one country, in one community shapes the interpretation of the reality and individual behavior, and therefore it's very much correlated with culture. Is the best proxy of culture, all in all, that we can use. And Switzerland, again, it's an excellent example of this. As the different regions in Switzerland, we have 7 regions, 26 cantons, and we have 4 spoken languages. And these different, if you want, a language agglomeration can be thought as pockets of different culture, as a lot of different behavior in terms, for example, as you will see in a moment, trust in the others or political attitudes towards the rule of the states tend to vary a lot from language to language, from linguistic area to linguistic area. And the Swiss people call the border between the French and the German part of the country the Rostigraben, or the roast is a mashed potato dish of the German, typical of the German community, which does not exist in the French part of the country. So even from the gastronomic point of view, there is a huge difference between the French and the German part of the country. And we also further look to 2 dimensions of culture. One of these is the one that Kahanec was introducing to you, the level of interpersonal trust, a measure, classic measure of social capital, and the other are preference for redistribution, which is an indicator of individualism. We have in Switzerland, we look at basically the 2020, which was the year in which the pandemic struck the country, and we divided this in 5 periods. We have a first pre-lockdown period in which the COVID was already in the country, but no measure were enacted. Then we have the extraordinary situation, which we call a national lockdown. It was not exactly a lockdown as in France or in Italy, for example, but very stringent measures were enacted in all the cantons in the same way. So here is really where we can check and test the effect on culture on compliance. Then there were 3 different following phases: an easing of measures, a phase of no restriction, essentially in the summer of 2020, and then when the second wave affected the country, we have a soft lockdown or an heterogeneous lockdown, because cantons were reacted in heterogeneous way. So really the period between the 16th of March and April 27 was the only period in which all the cantons were under the same kind of rules, and therefore this period allowed us to test the impact of culture better than the others. First, before then going to the regression, just giving you a taste of what we're doing here, we are just showing you the changes of mobility with respect to the base period, which is the first 6 weeks of 2020, in 3 different linguistic areas. We have the German-speaking cantons, the purple line, we have the French-speaking cantons, the yellow line, and we have bilingual cantons. And as you can see, mobility was higher during the first lockdown, which was between 16th of March and April 27, and during the second phase of lockdown in German-speaking area with respect to French-speaking area. That is, the reduction in mobility was lower in German-speaking areas of the country than in French-speaking ones. Now, of course, this is a graphical evidence. We want to test it in a more standard and a more robust way. So what we basically do is run a difference exercise, where our main dependent variable is the Google mobility measure for Canton C in the AT in non-essential activities, so retail and recreation. And our main interest here is, of course, our coefficient beta, which is the interaction term between the dummy for the language spoken in the area and the phase dummy. So this phase dummy, takes value of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 0, depending on the 5 different phases that I've shown you before, and capture the different evolution of mobility in areas with different languages. So it's in essence a difference and difference exercise, where our key identifying assumption is that after controlling for the Canton characteristic, the severity of the pandemic, and daily changes in mobility at the country level, the differential change that we observe is unrelated to factors other than the ones that we are explicitly control for. So what are our results? Well, what we find is that during the national lockdown, the mobility in German region decreased less than the French region by around 7 percentage points, suggesting that the German-speaking canton displaying lower compliance with federal policies and social distancing with respect to a French-speaking one. Bilingual cantons here represent an interesting middle ground, and we don't find any significant difference in the patterns of mobility. We also, for the sake of studying a bit what was happening before giving a graphical intuition of what was going on, look at the weekly interaction between between weak dummies and the language spoken in the different region. And as you can see in this graph, the differences in weekly mobility between the German and the French canton over the several phases were before the 16th of March, which is basically the 12th week of the year, there was no difference in mobility. Then the difference in mobility emerged after the implementation of the national lockdown, and German-speaking cantons, in German-speaking canton, mobility was strictly higher. Then again, when there was the easing of the measure and the cancellation of this measure during the summer, no difference were again emerge again between the two types of cantons. And again, we have an emergence of difference and an higher mobility in German-speaking cantons during the soft lockdown, especially for what concerns...
Okay, we have about 1 minute left.
Yeah, sure. I'm getting there. Especially for what refers to the first period, to the first national lockdown, this is a strong evidence on the differential, the impact of culture. As I was telling you before, we also consider, for example, trust and preference for social spending, individualism, and we find more or less the same result, which is the opposite results that Canton find. That is, higher trust canton. In higher trust cantons, mobility was strictly higher during the first and the second lockdown than in cantons with a level of trust which is basically lower. So, and here I come to my conclusion. It's not necessary to go into robustness exercise. Our idea is that when we look to cultural traits and cultural characteristics, it's probably not enough to focus on just one of these, like, for example, trust, because trust can have a different impact in a context with respect to the others. And it depends on the relation that these characteristics has with other cultural traits. For example, in the context of Switzerland, countries with a higher trust level of trust are German-spoken countries, where there is a majority of voters for the SVP, which is the right-wing party. That's why I was interested, and I was asking before to my colleague Kat, and the relationship in US between the level of trust and the political preferences. Thank you very much, Terra.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Opportunity for questions or comments. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you very interesting for this interesting and thank you very much for this very interesting and convincing analysis. It appears that there's something special about the German culture which makes them very reluctant to take up measures to provide to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. So, for instance, most German-speaking regions have a lower uptake on vaccination, and I think you alluded to it, but I didn't really get it. Is there something special which is about the German culture which makes them very reluctant?
That's an excellent question. We have actually a follow-up paper with Nia in which we look, we're running a regression discontinuity design on the Rosti Graben. So we take municipalities on the border and we study the extension of the spread of the virus, and we're finding that the spread of the virus is much lower in German-speaking municipalities than in French-speaking one. In general, I think that what you have special in the German versus the French culture is, first of all, you have a different culture of personal contact. You have reduced physical distance and you touch less each other, which is the first way you reduce contagion. So if I meet somebody and I naturally stand farther from him and I don't touch him, for me, reducing mobility is less important. It's less effective as a way of reducing the risk of contagion. In a sense, interpersonal physical distance can become a substitute for social distance. And this is explained part of the story. Another part of the story, of course, when I speak about mobility, can be explained by the level of individualism. So that in German part of Switzerland is very strong. So there is a rejection for state intervention, which is much higher than in French part. And this is very cultural. You can see, you can check the vote and the votes, for example, in the referenda. In the French-speaking part, you always tend to want more social spending, while the German-speaking part is much more conservative of that. So if you want a mix of these elements can explain why you have such a clear different reaction and even different spread of contagion. And if the spread of contagion is lower because of certain kind of natural cultural behavior, then this can also explain why I'm more resistant to vaccine intake, in a sense.
So maybe that's just an idea. So one hypothesis is that in Germany we have this Rudolf Steiner philosophy that's quite widespread, and some people try to explain the reluctancy to take up vaccinations, for instance, by people adhering to this philosophy, you know, and maybe that's also a venue to pursue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, and then it would be interesting to see to what extent certain philosophy are, in a sense, endogenous. Because, you know, I can afford the luxury of a certain philosophy. Is my way of life isolating me more from certain? So
that could be,
they are absolutely fascinating question then. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we will move on to the third and final paper of the session. And so this will be a presentation by Lessor Delaporte. Thank you very much, Lessor. You can start sharing your screen.
Yeah. Can you see my screen? So I'll put it in full screen mode. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present this joint paper. So this paper is looking at potential consequences of the social distancing measures on poverty and labor income inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean. So as we have seen with all the presentations, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a tremendous impact on the lives of many individuals. We have seen that social distancing measures had to be introduced in order to prevent the spread of the virus. And this has led to a decline in GDP worldwide. We have seen as well important distributional effects. So not all workers have been affected in the same proportion. And so this is what we're looking at in this paper. We're looking at potential changes in poverty and inequality. So there has been a growing literature. I won't probably give all the papers a fair, some time to present the literature review that has been growing during this last year. So in this literature, we're contributing by evaluating the potential distributional consequences of social distancing on poverty and labor income inequality in 20 lakh countries. So we first, we construct an index, which is named the Lockdown Working Ability Index, which is supposed to represent the capacity of individuals to remain active. We're going to focus on the first phase of the lockdown. And so something we were quite interested in this paper, and we have seen with the two previous presentations, that there is a difference between the formal de jure lockdown policies, where you assume that there is perfect compliance, so the lockdown policies have been perfectly enforced, and de facto lockdowns, when you take into account the fact that there is some degree of non-compliance. So this is something that we will be looking at. And once we have identified the individuals that were able to remain active, we can examine changes in poverty and labor income inequality. So we first calculate the teleworking ability of individuals. So we use information about the task content of occupations from the World Bank STEP surveys. So we don't have, unfortunately, information on the task content of occupations for each country of our sample. So we use the information on 2 lakh countries that were sampled in the STEP surveys, Bolivia and Colombia, and we're able to construct an average share of the workers that are able or unable to work from home. So using this information, we classify workers as unable to work from home if they either do not use a computer at work, so they report these activities based on their job, if they lift heavy objects, repair electronic equipment, operate heavy machinery, or report that customer interaction is very important. And so based on this classification, we can get an average share of individuals that are potentially able to work from home. We merge this average share to our individual level data, and we get a different proportion of people that are potentially able to work from home. And this varies quite a lot across countries, as you can see. So for instance, the lowest level is in Nicaragua with 7.5% to 16% in Barbados. And so this share does not only varies across countries, but it also varies within countries across industries and occupations. So this is one first component of or determinant of being able to remain active. We argue that it's not only the only determinant. So you also have had work closures during the pandemic, and so some workers were considered essential, which means that they were able to remain active regardless of their ability to work from home. In the opposite, you had workers that were in closed activities, so activities that were considered dangerous. And so in order to prevent the spread of the virus, they had to close, and these workers were not able to remain active during the lockdown. So we classify open and closed activities. We have looked at the national laws, decrees, and press release in each country of our sample. And so you can classify these activities into 3 categories, open, closed, and those that were restricted in terms of mobility. And so this is something that we have to take into account when we want to estimate the proportion of individuals that were able to remain active. So here, to give you a rough idea of what we can tell for our countries in our sample. So here on the left-hand side, you have the proportion of workers that were in closed, restricted, and open activities. So you can see that the intensity of the lockdown really varies quite a lot across countries. So in Nicaragua, they did not implement a lockdown. In the opposite, Argentina, for instance, had 29% of workers that were in closed activities, so they were not able to remain active. On the right-hand side, you have the duration of the first phase of the lockdown. So this also varied across countries. We have reported here only the countries that have adopted a national strategy in terms of the lockdown policy. Other countries have adopted a strategy at the local level. And so this is something that we do also within each country, within the country in each region. So once we have this classification of occupations, we want to calculate the lockdown working ability index, which captures the ability of individuals to remain active. So we're going to assume that it's equal to 1 when the activity is open, so individuals are able to remain active. It's going to be equal to 0 when the activity is closed. And when the activity is restricted in terms of mobility, it's going to depend on the ability of the worker to work from home. So once we have computed this lockdown working ability, first assuming perfect compliance, so everyone is respecting the social distancing rules, you can see that the share of individuals that are potentially able to work under the lockdown varies again across countries. It's the lowest in Argentina since they adopted the toughest lockdown. And you have all the individuals in Nicaragua that were able to remain active since they haven't implemented a lockdown. So the next thing that we wanted to do was to estimate the difference between de facto and de jure lockdowns. So the fact that you have to take into account non-compliance. So we estimate non-compliance by taking Google Workplace Mobility data and the Oxford Stringency Index. And you can see that when we estimate this proxy of compliance, it varies, it decreases steadily over the first phase of the lockdown in all countries. So this is something that we have to take into account. So we modify the expression of the index. We're going to assume now that for all the individuals that were not able to work, it's going to depend additionally on the level of non-compliance at the regional level in each country. And so when we compute this index, you can see that the shares of individuals that were potentially able to work has increased everywhere, and especially more in countries in which you had a higher level of non-compliance. So for instance, Venezuela or Brazil. And so once we have identified the individuals that were able to remain active, we calculate this potential labor income loss for each worker. So it's going to be equal to the annual labor income in T-1, but reduced by this fraction of this annual labor income that has been lost due to the inability of the worker to remain active. So this is why it's multiplied by the duration of the lockdown, and then 1 minus the lockdown working ability. So we first look at the lockdown incidence curves. So here it's telling you a bit which parts of the labor income distribution has suffered the most. So you can see that it's quite different depending on the country that you examine. For instance, in Argentina, it's the bottom part of the labor income distribution that has suffered the most. And it's different under perfect and imperfect compliance. And this is usually due to the fact that the most vulnerable individuals are more likely to be the ones that are not complying with the rules. I'm going a bit fast in order to be on time, but so the impact on poverty and labor income inequality, once we have, we estimate 3 measures: the headcount poverty index, the Gini coefficient, and the mean logarithmic deviation index. And we see that there is an increase in poverty and labor income inequality in pretty much all countries. We see at the level of the LAC region that there is an increase in poverty and inequality, a higher increase under perfect compliance. So again, this is due to the fact that imperfect compliance is attenuating the effect since the people that are potentially the non-compliers in our exercise are the ones that are the most vulnerable. And so we finally do a between and within inequality decomposition exercise, and we see that both the between country and the within country inequality has increased. The between country inequality increases by more than the within country inequality. So just to summarize our results, we have found a sizable potential increase in poverty in almost all countries. We have found the same for labor income inequality. These changes are larger under the de jure lockdowns than the de facto lockdowns. So when you're assuming non-compliance, the changes are reduced, but they're still positive. And so the social distancing measures are likely to worsen inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean, both between and within countries. And so we argue that this needs to be taken into account in terms of policy implications, for instance, to the need to assist the most vulnerable individuals in LAC countries. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I see Giovanni, you're already ready with a question. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Isaura, for your very interesting presentation. I have just a brief question regarding your future, as this paper is already published. I wanted to know if you are considering including, I don't know if in the Latin American and Caribbean countries, they introduce, like in other countries, emergency benefits to give some income support to more affected populations. So I wanted to know if you are considering also this further step in your future researchers, and because probably what we seen in Italy, and not only in Italy, is that the emergency benefits were particularly relevant in reducing the negative effects of the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's a very important question, actually. So it's something that we wanted to include in our exercises, but the fact that we were using we're using surveys that happened before that were collected before the pandemic, in order to have like a first estimation of these changes. And so we were not able to identify the individuals that have been receiving benefits during the pandemic. So this has limited our ability to include the social assistance programs. So I think, now there are many studies that are looking at real-time value surveys and trying to include this in their estimation, since now they have the information of who has been receiving these benefits. So I think it would be interesting to examine, to compare their measures with ours. I think in terms of the impact that it would have on our estimations, we think that since the social assistance programs or the benefits are in Latin America are mostly targeting the bottom part of the labor income distribution, it should have a similar effect than what we observe with imperfect compliance. So reducing the effect of the labor income loss, but mostly in the bottom part of the labor income distribution. But yeah, unfortunately, this is something that we can't include in our exercise.
Yeah, thank you. Eventually, you can also consider to make some tax benefit microsimulation model or something like that. I don't know if it already exists for the Latin American countries, but eventually you could be the first one eventually.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. So now maybe a round of applause for our three presenters and three very interesting papers in this session. Right. And so I'll send it back to Michaella and Klaus for wrap up and goodbyes, I guess.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you so much to all of our presenters who have given such excellent insights. Thank you as well for those of you in the audience from very different time zones. I appreciate that you've kept your energy and your focus despite being on Zoom and whatever wee hours of the morning or night you might be in. So thank you all very much for a very successful session. From my perspective, there are very few things that are still on the agenda. I just want to inform you that the recording will be made available in the coming days and weeks via the GLO website. And I think other than that, I will stop the recording. We don't need to have the end greetings on it. So I turn back over to Klaus.
Well, I haven't much to say at the end, but